tone things down a little bit here. And first want to express my gratitude for the thousands of men and women who work every day on the front line with the FBI. I come from a background as a prosecutor, and our local law enforcement work with the FBI every day in our local office in Minnesota. And then in the Senate, I've had the privilege to work with many, many people in the FBI. And I think the Inspector General's job is incredibly important. He keeps everyone honest. But I do think it's important for those agents and for those in law enforcement that are watching today that people understand there are people up here that understand that you're simply doing your jobs, which I think is basically, with some suggestions and recommendations for change, what the Inspector General found in this report. So before I start my questions, I think it's important to put this discussion in context with what happened in the 2016 election, which is why we are here today. It is now undisputed by our intelligence agencies that Russia invaded our democracy, not with bombs or jets or tanks, but with a sophisticated cyber mission to undermine the underpinnings of our very democracy, a democracy that hundreds of thousands of men and women have lost their lives on the battlefield defending both our democracy and democracies abroad, a democracy that 4 little girls' innocents at the height of the civil rights movement lost their lives in a church in Birmingham, Alabama, because people were trying to hold on to that democracy and make sure that it was extended to people in this country. So let's remember why we're here today. Let's remember the words of Dan Coates, the former director of the National Intelligence Agency, who served in the Senate, well respected by colleagues on both sides of the aisle. He said that, in fact, Russia has been emboldened to do this again. And I did appreciate Senator Graham's words that he made clear that it was not Ukraine that invaded this election. It was Russia. And it was the words of Fiona Hill and the impeachment hearings over in the House that I thought were important to remember. She said anyone that is repeating this lie is basically peddling in Russian propaganda. So let's remember that this is not about one election or one party. It is about our democracy. What can we do? Well, we can be honest, and we can stop making political hay out of this, and we can actually take some actions that would protect our election in 2020. And that includes finishing the work that Senator Langford and I have started to pass not only the money, which I appreciate, to help states to secure our elections, but to also get in place requirements to push those states that don't have backup paper ballots fully, 11 of them, to get those backup paper ballots, and to make sure we have audits and to make sure we have better communication between federal and state authorities, to do something about the propaganda by actually moving forward on the bill that Senator McCain and I had and that Senator Graham and I now have, the Honest Ads Act, which requires those social media companies, and I have absolutely no idea why we don't do that, to play by the same rules of the road for paid political ads, which would greatly help us, but not completely, but greatly help us with this propaganda problem. So here we go. You wrote this report, Inspector Horowitz, after interviewing more than 100 witnesses and reviewing over 1 million documents. Is that right?
That's correct.
And under department guidelines, an investigation has an authorized purpose if it is open to detect, obtain information about, or prevent or protect against federal crimes or threats to the national security, or to collect foreign intelligence. You found that the investigation at issue today was open to determine whether people associated with the Trump campaign were coordinating with the Russian government. Is that right?
That is the reason the FBI provided.
And again, to be clear, you did not find that the FBI acted improperly when it opened the counterintelligence investigation that you reviewed in writing in this report.
That's
Is that
correct.
right? The department's guidelines also require that a decision to open investigation is supported by, as you describe in your report, allegations, reports, facts, or circumstances that indicate the possibility of criminal activity or a national security threat. You found that the FBI's investigation was predicated on a report from a friendly foreign government that heard that the Trump campaign had received some kind of suggestion that Russia could help them by releasing information that was damaging to Hillary Clinton. Is that right?
That's correct.
As a former prosecutor, I know that it is critical that the FBI is able to take an action like it did here to investigate threats to our national security. Do you think that interference in our elections by a foreign government constitutes a national security threat?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Does anything in your report call into question the finding in the special counsel's report that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in a sweeping and systematic fashion?
No, it doesn't. In fact, we cite the special counsel's report here in a footnote laying out all the different reports that have been released on that issue.
Does anything in your report call into question Chairman Burr's statement, the Republican Chairman Burr's statement, that, quote, Russia is waging an information warfare campaign against the U.S. that didn't start and didn't end with the 2016 election?
No, it doesn't.
Does anything in your report call into question the assessment by FBI Director Wray that Russians' interference in our elections is ongoing and that its interference in the 2018 midterms were a, quote, dress rehearsal, end quote, for the 2020 elections?
No, it doesn't.
Does anything in your report call into question the finding in the special counsel's report that, quote, the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and work to secure that outcome?
We don't take issue with any part of the special counsel's report now.
Okay. Did you find any evidence that political bias or other improper consideration affected the FBI's decision to open the investigation into George Papadopoulos?
No, we don't.
Did you find any evidence that political bias or other improper considerations affected the decision to open the investigation into Paul Manafort?
No, we don't.
Did you find any evidence that political bias or other improper considerations affected the decision to open the investigation into Michael Flynn?
We did not.
Did you find any investigation that political bias or other improper considerations affected the decision to open the investigation into Carter Page?
No documentary or testimonial evidence or other evidence.
So we are clear, did your report uncover systematic political bias at the FBI?
As to what we looked at and the openings, we did not find documentary testimonial evidence to support a finding of bias.
Can you comment on why it is critical that the American people have confidence in the rule of law and the independence of the Justice Department?
Absolutely. I also was a former prosecutor and federal prosecutor previously. I did public corruption cases in Southern District of New York. And the whole foundation of the Justice Department and law enforcement on the federal level and at the state and local level is apolitical, non-political decision-making made by prosecutors and agents working together to protect communities.
Very good. I want to follow up on your discussion on the issue you briefly discussed, whistleblowers, with Senator Feinstein, because it's so important, and I know that Senator Grassley also cares a lot about this issue. Can you speak generally to how often in your career information provided to whistleblowers has proved important and led to uncover wrongdoing?
Well, I'll speak to certainly my experience in the 7 years as IG, as in the first instance. From the get-go, fast and furious, critical that the agents came forward there. We've found numerous instances in our audits and our reviews with whistleblowers coming forward and reporting evidence. And I'll add, going back 30 years to my career as a prosecutor in New York doing police corruption cases, we had a incredibly brave and courageous police officer who saw corruption in his midst and came forward and reported it and allowed us to make a very substantial police corruption case that would have continued but for that courageous officer.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. After your report was released on Monday, Attorney General Barr stated his opinion that the FBI launched an intrusive investigation of a U.S. presidential campaign on the thinnest of suspicions. When the FBI decided to open its investigations, the U.S. Intelligence Committee was already aware of Russian efforts to interfere with the 2016 election. Is that correct?
I'm actually not sure what the Intelligence Committee knew at the time.
It was in that context that the FBI received information. I'm just going to let's move forward, understand your answer. That the FBI received information from a foreign government, which we know from reports came from an Australian diplomat, that reported that a Trump campaign official suggested that the Trump campaign had received some kind of suggestion from Russia that would assist the campaign by releasing information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton's campaign. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Your report also quoted then Chief of the National Security Division, David Loftman, who said that it would have been a, quote, dereliction of duty and responsibility of the highest order not to commit the appropriate resources as urgently as possible to run these facts to the ground and find out what's going on. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In light of all of that was occurring at that time, and it's always easy in hindsight to look back at things, but at that time, do you agree with Attorney General Barr that the investigation was predicated on the thinnest of suspicions?
Well, I'm not going to get into a comparison on what his view. He's free to have his opinion. We have our finding, and as I said earlier, I stand by our conclusion.
And your conclusion, again, is?
That it was sufficient predication to open the investigation based on the low threshold required by department and FBI policy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about Page, just briefly about Papadopoulos.
Yes.
I don't want anybody to believe that anybody named in the initial investigation has been convicted of being an agent of the Russians. Has anybody associated with the Trump campaign been charged with the crime of colluding with the Russians?
Not that I know of as I sit here.
No, I think we would know by now. Mr. Papadopoulos, he was actually being surveilled by the FBI, is that correct?
If you're talking about the confidential human source operations, yes, they did CHS operations with him. They considered but did not proceed to seek a FISA application.
Okay, well, but he was being wiretapped and he didn't know it.
Well, he was being an undercover operation and having a wire with a.
He's talking to somebody that's got a wire.
Source. Right. I just want to be careful because you do a wire, you think of a court order.
No, trust me.
I just want to be careful how I say that.
With a court order.
Right.
So.